This episode of the Henry's Uncle podcast is brought to you by donations from our generous supporters. If you love the Henry's Uncle podcast and want to support us and our nonprofit, please go to henrysuncle.org and click the donate button and/or give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. Thank you for your continued support. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Henry's Uncle podcast. Today we talk with Nesil. Nesil opens up and reflects on her obsessive behavior as a young kid, why she seeked out drugs as an early teenager, and she also talks about being in active addiction throughout college and how she hit rock bottom a few years later to finally seek recovery and live out her dreams in New York. Okay, so we have Nesil on today. Nesil, I was introduced to you by our last guest, Amanda Heminger. You guys have been best friends. So before I go too far, I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nesil. I'm excited to be here. I listened to Amanda's last week, and it was so cool to hear her. And even though I kind of know her story, it was really, she told it in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think her way of explaining what she went through for her whole life, and then why that led to alcoholism and some other substances and the recovery. I thought it was absolutely spectacular the way she told her story, and it was very, very inspiring. So yeah, it was really exciting that Amanda reached out to a few of her friends and you opted in. I really love to hear anybody's story about recovery because they're all so inspiring. So yeah, I would love for you to kind of talk about your childhood, where in your life, and how your addiction came up, and then also how you came into recovery.
So similar to Amanda, there's not like a whole lot of reasons I should have been an addict. I don't have any addiction in my family that I know of. And I don't have childhood trauma, which, those can be two big factors. But it is really just a testament to, this disease doesn't discriminate. And, I remember being really little and being like very obsessive with things like sugar. Like my mom would like hide candy bars around the house, and I would come home from school and like tear the house apart, just like looking for the candy bars. Or I remember for some reason one day I wasn't going to eat sugar that day. And I remember just kind of lying on the floor, like feeling like I was going to die, which is interesting because addiction on like your brain level, it's going down to this really primal place where your brain literally thinks that drugs are like food, water, and sex, like that you need it for survival. So kind of that feeling like I was going to die, I didn't understand it then, but looking back, it makes sense that that's just kind of my addictive tendencies.
How old were you when that happened?
Probably like elementary school. I just kind of remember for some reason deciding I wasn't going to eat sugar that day, and then just like laying on the floor like I'm going to die if I don't eat it.
That's crazy. For me personally now, like sweets are like, it's hard to take them away. My wife does the same thing. She hides stuff around the house, hides them from me. On that aspect, I get it. Like it's silly to talk about like right now as a grown adult, but yeah, it's something in your mind just kind of triggers and you just can't stop obsessing about it. It's kind of insane. So you were that, that young. And did your mom or, did your parents have any, I don't want to say inclination, but like, were they going, wow, that's kind of pretty, insane? Like at such a young age, like you have to have sweets? Or
I probably not, just because I think like most kids really want sweets, and like, you've experienced that. Like, I think it's, it's not till like hindsight that you look and you're like, oh, okay, these are some things that kind of led up. But, probably most kids either just grow out of it or it's not that serious. But I mean, I know like me and my sister are very, very different. My sister was always like very, following the rules and did everything she was supposed to. And then I was always kind of doing the opposite of that. So maybe that would give some kind of inclination that at least I was a bigger risk taker, like negative risks.
So sorry, I was going to ask a question. Did you guys go to private school by any chance?
No.
Okay. I only ask that with the rule taker, because that's been such a big topic in our family, or before my brother passed, because we both went to private school from kindergarten through high school, and growing up like at such a young age and saying like, if you sin, you're going to go to hell, and all that stuff. And there's like such a big burden. So like when you do mess up, you want to lie because you don't want to go to hell, but then you're lying. So it's just like a revolving door. So that's why I asked that. Like, I think I totally understand where you're coming from that, because I'm still that way where I got my mom's Catholic guilt. I would say it's follow the rules and got to be on time. You got to turn your homework in. And if something happens, like you just stress about it. And I don't want to say my brother did like negative stuff or anything. He was, always on time and stuff like that. But later on, that kind of Catholic guilt sort of went away, I would say, kind of lack of a better term. But yeah, I totally get where you're both coming from. Do you have an older or younger sister?
Older.
Older. Okay. So yeah, you're going through there. And you said you, before the podcast, we're talking that you grew up in Seattle.
Yeah, Federal Way. So just a little bit south of Seattle.
Okay. And then you guys were there, and then, kind of moving on into your high school life. What was going on then?
So I think like in high school, I remember kind of the year that I started really getting into drugs and stuff. The year before that, I had a boyfriend, and I also was doing dance a lot. And so it felt like every time I was either at dance, and then if I wasn't, like my boyfriend was over, we had kind of like a codependent relationship probably. But I just kind of, my time was always filled. And then I remember the following year, I stopped doing dance at a studio and went to my school's dance team, which was like a lot less hours. And then I broke up with my boyfriend. So there was just like a lot of free time. And I remember just getting that feeling of like impending doom, like, what am I going to do with my time? And not to say that like it's because I had too much time on my hands, but I think that definitely can be a contributing factor. I mean, in lots of countries where they have more like after school programs, they see addiction go down.
How old were you at this time?
So I started kind of trying some drugs when I was 14, like smoking weed or doing mushrooms or like, and then I think when I was 15 is when it really got into that. I had all this time on my hands and I really kind of dove in a lot deeper.
Was that, like you said, you had a lot of time on your hands and that impending doom? Did you have anxiety, like depression, or?
Yeah, I think it probably was like anxiety and depression. And I think maybe even just like a normal teenage angsty amount, but I just didn't, I didn't have the tools to handle it. And like, I remember when I had kind of tried the drugs before, it wasn't anything super magical that happened. Like, I don't know if my brain just didn't accept it that well, or like I was doing them wrong. But I remember then I think I did ecstasy for the first time, or maybe the second time, but the first time I only took half one and this time was the whole one. And it was just that feeling of like total euphoria. Like, this is how I'm supposed to feel. I want to feel this all the time. Everything that was like stressful or scary just melted away. And it was like, I've arrived. This is it. This is what I'm supposed to do with my life.
Really? That quickly?
Yeah.
Wow. That's so, I mean, that's at what, age 15, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's insane. Okay. So, I mean, you did mushrooms and marijuana. I mean, stuff that, I guess people wouldn't contribute to, like, oh, these are hard drugs or something like that. Did ecstasy, and you had that euphoria. You talked about kind of that teenage angst. And so it sounds like you're trying to cope, with everything, like the extra time, the boyfriend not being there, or you broke up with the boyfriend and all that kind of stuff. Could you, if you recall, like describe what you were, kind of that angst or anxiety, or like, because you mentioned that impending doom, and that just sounds like a lot when you're 15. I mean, that just,
Yeah, I think at the time I thought it was boredom. Like, I was bored. I didn't know how to fill my time. And now I kind of have a little bit more emotional intelligence. I think it was depression, like the not knowing the boredom was actually just me kind of, I guess, feeling like I wasn't enough. Like, I didn't know what to do with my time. Like, it was just this thing that, like, drugs are this new thing to fixate on, where like I had this thing. And, like, I remember trying drugs from other people was like fine, but I remember being very excited the first time I actually had my own, and it was like this thing that was mine. And I don't know how to explain it. Like, it's like I had this control over my drug use, and I liked that.
I see. So, like, the drugs kind of became your new dance almost. Like, it was filling your time. It was taking away, the stress, the anxiety, kind of like what, any physical activity would do. And so you're going through there, you said you did ecstasy, and it gave you this euphoria, and everything just kind of, all the stress, anxiety, everything just went away. And like you mentioned, this was what you were destined to be. Lead us through what kind of happens next through high school.
Sure. And when I say like I was destined to be that, I didn't think, oh, I'm destined to be a drug addict. I'm going to be a junkie and it's going to be so awesome. I think it's more just like this feeling is like the way people are supposed to feel. And this is what I want. But in my mind, like, I never thought I would get addicted to drugs. Like, it's just, you just kind of always think why would this happen to me? Like this is just something, most teenagers do drugs. This is fine. And just kind of that denial protects you from seeing what's actually going on. So I kind of, I kept doing just different pills like drugs, ecstasy, Adderall, kind of whatever I could get my hands on. But the thing with doing uppers like ecstasy and Adderall is it brings you up really high and then it crashes you. And so kind of all those happy chemicals get even more depleted. So I was getting more and more depressed in between using, like the anxiety and depression that I was already experiencing was getting really heightened. And so eventually I found opiates, which uppers have this come down. So like I would get really bad come downs. I would get really stressed and anxious, or sometimes I couldn't sleep. And so when I found opiates, it felt like, I get to get high, but there's no downside, because I didn't know about withdrawal yet. And so
who introduced you to opiates?
I think the first time my friend had like a surgery or something and had some. And then another time, I just had this drug dealer who would be like, hey, I have this now. And I'd be like, cool, I'll try that. And so I think he was like, oh, I have Oxycontin now if you want. And I was like, cool, yeah, I'll do that. As much as I wanted to make it seem like I was pressured by my friends, when other people found out, I always was kind of seeking drugs. Like if I knew somebody was doing it, then I'd be like, oh, can I try that too? I think the first time I tried weed, it was a friend of mine who I knew had done it. And I was like, oh, I want to try. Like, I just remember always seeking it out.
That's a very interesting point. Like, because, like how you say, like you weren't pressured into it. And I think so many people want to say that, like, oh, it's someone else's fault. And like, you're just saying, hey, no, it was me. I'm sorry to hear that, because like it just happens so many times where someone has a surgery, they have a prescription, and I get it. Like when you're a teenager, you think if you hand out a pill or whatever, like nothing's going to happen. You don't know the consequences at that age. It's just a teenager's mind. How did the opiates, the downers, how did those help you? Because we talked about the uppers and when all the endorphins are released, and then when like you experiencing anxiety and depression coming down and it gets worse and worse. How do the opiates make you feel?
They just made me feel like kind of that euphoria, but then also like a body high in a way where I could be doing anything. I could be at school, I could be at, dance, I could be doing whatever it was. And I wasn't really like out of my mind high. I could still function. And it felt like I just had this feeling of well-being inside me. And so no matter what I was doing, I was okay.
And this is, like you mentioned, like you're 15, 16, 17 at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, I'm first of all, terribly sorry. That's just a lot to go through, especially as a high schooler. Teenagers already have enough to deal with. You're going through this, did looking back, did any of your friends or anyone notice that you were drug seeking or things were off, or did you, hold it together very well?
So I think my friends who were kind of also just drug addicts and using a lot, they didn't really notice. But then I did have a group of friends who were getting concerned. I kind of remember them having like a mock intervention for me in the girls' bathroom at school, but I just kind of played it off as like, you guys are making a big deal out of this. And I truly believed that at the time, because it was like, well, no, like these people are doing it too. You guys are just overreacting. You guys are all probably going to want to try it eventually anyway. But I think at home, I held it together pretty good, because it felt like I didn't want my parents to find out, because I knew that they would be so sad.
Yeah, sure. That's a lot of stigma and shame to be carrying around, as I've come to find out over these last years. Really, this is my first time asking the question, actually, because it's been coming up a lot. I know my answer to this, but when we talk about drug addiction, and you never think you're going to become a drug addict, and that person, we always hear like quote unquote that person, right? When you're in high school and like you had the mock intervention and you're saying, oh, I'm fine, don't worry about it, I have my stuff together. What was your impression of a person who abuses drugs, a drug addict? What did you think? Was it the typical stereotype of someone on the street, shooting up drugs? Or
that's a really good question. I guess in my mind, I thought of it as someone who couldn't function. Like all they were was using drugs, and it was no longer like a fun recreational thing. It was something that that was their whole being. And yeah, maybe like shooting dope, maybe like harder drugs. But honestly, I think what it was is like with every new drug I tried, like at first it feels like, oh no, that's something drug addicts do. It's too scary. And then the moment somebody you even sort of know does it, you're like, oh, well, they're alive. They're fine. This is something that we can do now.
Yeah, because I know for myself, and just like many people, you think of someone who's abusing drugs as the person on the corner downtown and by themselves and shooting up. And I think so much of that stigma just needs to be shed away or it does need to be shed away because I heard this from someone. I think it was like Chris Herron, who's a wonderful motivation speaker. It's those are the people who are kind of the tail ends of their addiction. It's not the beginning where, like you mentioned, you're in high school and you try a pill or here and there, you try ecstasy or marijuana, whatever it may be, and we don't know at the time that's what's going to happen, right? And when he said that, I go, God, that's just kind of hit a light bulb in my brain. We always talk about the ending, but we never talk about the beginning. And I think the beginning is such a vital point because there's so many clues, like you've been talking about, and like you had your friends who kind of did a mock intervention. And do you remember some of the signs they may have said or what you may have been going through that led to that mock intervention? Like, were you not showing up anymore, like for them, or do you remember the signs that why they created, did this mock intervention for you?
I mean, this was like right at the beginning of, like, later they had more valid points to say, but I think at that point, I think I went on like a Xanax bender and I was just like crazy at school. Like there was a point where I was crawling under desks and like yelling things. Like I went on like a couple days bender of doing Xanax. And I think it was just they were just kind of like, what is happening? And so, yeah, I think it was something like that. And so I think it was just at that point, they realized I was doing drugs. They were concerned because I hadn't mentioned it to them. And then it was something, they wanted to talk to me about.
And no teacher intervention or like, hey, why are you crawling under your desk or anything like that?
Oh, no, it was public school. I don't even think they noticed I was crawling under my desk.
That's crazy. It just like seems like as a teacher, that'd be like so obvious. Like, okay, what's going on here? I guess not. I know, I don't reel against teachers because I know how much they have on their plate. My mom was a public school teacher her whole life. So I understand. Okay, so you're going through this, you have a mock intervention, you're high school. And to reiterate, it sounds like your home life is still good though. Like, your parents, your sister, all that kind of stuff. They're, like you said, like you had no childhood trauma or, anything like that going on. It was just more of you were seeking this kind of, trying to fill your void from time, basically.
Yeah. And, and I think the void isn't necessarily from having time. I think that those other things were just filling this kind of void I already had. And then having this spare time left me alone with myself, which was terrifying at the time, I guess. I didn't quite know what to do with it. But yeah, I mean, my life at home was good. I think that it made me really, really put a lot of time and effort into making sure nobody found out for two reasons. One, I would love to say it's only because, my parents, they're great and I wouldn't want them to feel like scared for me and I wouldn't want them to feel like it was their fault. But then also the second part of that is, the self-centered reason of, if they find out because they haven't really done anything wrong, I would feel so guilty that maybe it would cause me to want to stop. And I'm not ready to do that yet.
Is there a correlation? I don't know if if you've talked about this through recovery. Is there a correlation between like eating disorders and kind of a drug addiction like that? Because I know going through high school there was many girls who were going through this eating disorder, and it's like when you're there, you see it, and you so badly want to tell someone, you want to tell their parents, and they're like, no, you may not tell anybody else. And it's gut wrenching on our side. It's like we don't know what to do. You feel guilty for not saying anything. Do you know anything like that?
Yeah, actually. So there is a lot of parallels between eating disorders and addiction. It's that same kind of obsessive compulsion. It's the same type of, you're obsessing over whatever way your eating disorder manifests, and then the compulsion to either not eat or throw up after eating or use laxative, whatever that is. And I think it has the similar like functions on the brain, like it hits that reward center when you act out in that eating disorder. I do know there is some eating disorder that runs in my family. So that could be like where the family addiction comes from. And then the other thing is I know a lot of female drug addicts, a lot of the time, especially with like Adderall and things like that, at first drugs are really attractive because you're like, oh, like I don't eat. and that's nice. And then it just kind of takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, no, that was, I know mention or Amanda and someone else I was talking to mentioned that too. Like, I didn't want to tell my parents because, you weren't ready to stop, and it's heart wrenching. Like when you hear that, because for me, it's friends telling me that, and it's like you want to go, tell their brother or sister or tell their parents, like you want to help in some way, and then but you don't want to betray your friend. It's like your parents, right? It's heartbreaking. So I apologize for that kind of tangent there.
I live for the tangents.
Right. Sorry. So please go ahead.
And so, I kind of, towards the end of high school, I was pretty addicted to Oxycontin, as well as just like whatever drugs I was doing at the time or could get my hands on. And I still didn't really know that withdrawal was a thing. I wasn't getting withdrawals yet. It was kind of, I don't know. I didn't end up getting them for quite a while. And then when I went to college, it really kind of spun out because I was in my own space. I didn't really have to hide it anymore. And that's when it turned into like, okay, I'm starting to lose a little bit of control of this. I would try to stop for weekends and only drink those weekends. I would try to, I would be pawning my stuff to get money for it. It started to have these consequences more. But I still like truly believe that I was just going to grow out of it eventually. I think a lot of people do drugs in adolescence, and a lot of people grow out of them. And then there's the people who are drug addicts or predisposed with this disease, and we don't. And even though it was like getting more serious and the consequences were getting more, I just really thought like, no, I'm going to be one of these people where I'm just going to grow out of it. I'm just young. And it started to get really expensive to do. And also I wasn't getting the same high that I was hoping for. So I moved into doing heroin instead. And that felt like it was actually a positive move at first because I was spending less money. My lungs got better. I was smoking Oxycontin, so like I wasn't coughing as much. In my mind, it felt like, okay, I'm actually doing something healthier in kind of a sick, twisted way. And it just kind of continued where like I really was physically addicted at that point. I was, for some reason, able to keep up with school. I think because I knew, if I got kicked out of school, then like there goes kind of my whole hustle. Like I had somebody who was fronting me drugs there and I was selling it. And so I had sort of this system I had in place to stay high. And if I got kicked out of school, then I would have to move out of Arizona, and then all of that was ruined. So, but I really was, especially when I was selling, it felt like every day I would wake up and be like, okay, I'm going to start weaning down. I'm going to quit today. I think when I would kind of go back and forth from selling or not selling. So when I wasn't selling, I would be like, man, if I just had enough dope, like I would be happy. And then when I was selling and I had enough dope, I would just feel like I couldn't even stop using for long enough to feel high because it was just this ongoing high. So there was no low to come up from. And I would think if I could just stop for a little bit, then I would be happy. And it was just like, no matter what I had, I just was never satisfied. It never felt okay.
So you were selling as well. And was that mainly to other college kids or?
Either college kids or just kids who lived in the area, like not children, but like, people around my age who just lived in that area.
Wow. Because for me, I went to U of O. I personally never experienced, someone, shooting up heroin or smoking oxy or whatever it is. Mostly it was just marijuana. And I look back at that a lot, and I always wonder how prevalent, especially going. I graduated 2009, and that was kind of the heights of all the oxy and everything around. And I always think back. It's been 11 years now. 12. Wait, what are we in? Almost 12 years now. How many people were going through this in terms of oxy, or I know there's plenty of Adderall down there, but oxy and heroin, and I always wonder how prevalent it is amongst college kids doing this, especially with the oxy boom, and not with oxy prices going out of sight, into heroin, and then now even with fentanyl coming in, it's so frightening. So I mean, in your terms, like, did you think there was a lot of going through college? It was pretty heroin was pretty prevalent, or was it just kind of, if you were in the crowd, you knew?
No, I wouldn't say it was prevalent. I think the people I sold to, I wouldn't say were like my friends. I actually kind of did the same thing I would do at home. Like I had two roommates. One of them would smoke heroin with me, and then I would hide shooting up in my room. And then the other one kind of knew we were like doing drugs. I think we tried to hide that we said it was just like Oxycontin or something. And so she, we would smoke weed with her. So it was like there was a mask for each person. I was still really hiding it. I think even the guy who was fronting me didn't know that I was shooting it because it just wasn't really a thing as much in Arizona. I don't know why in Washington it's more, maybe because it's hot, so people wear short sleeves. I have no idea. That's just a guess. But but yeah, it was just kind of whatever someone needed me to be socially acceptable, I could be that and then do whatever I wanted in secret.
So this is what, freshman year?
This would be like, I think now into like sophomore and junior year.
Okay. Okay. Wow. So you're going through college. I mean, you're doing it. You're getting going through the exams, everything. And
oh yeah.
And, I would assume you went home during breaks and all that kind of stuff. And there was still no inkling from parents or sibling, about what was happening or.
No. So I think they knew something was wrong. They didn't know what, which is very, very understandable because, you have my sister who's older, and also my sister she doesn't live at home for most of this. So maybe when I visit, there's some times where there's definitely some like weird behavior. I was falling asleep in cabs, things like that. But for my parents, they only had the experience of my sister who was just, always following the rules, getting her grades in, this was their experience of what a kid is like. So it was so left field for them to have somebody using drugs. So they could tell something was wrong, but who would guess heroin as the first? Right.
For their youngest daughter, who's 21, 22 at the time. I mean, it's the last thing you want to expect as a parent. And so if we can dive in, with your sister and your parents for a moment, you kind of expected something wrong. And like you said, like your sister was kind of I'm just going to call it like the golden child, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How did that affect your relationship with your sister and your parents? Was there a lot of anger and resentment, or were you more like, hey, I chose this. This is, I sought it out. What was kind of your relationship at that time?
I actually really liked that she was a golden child for my purposes because it did make it easier to kind of hide under that. It would be one thing if I had this like crazy drug addict older sister, they would kind of know what to look for. But it was like, there was kind of this everything is left field. And so I felt like I could kind of maneuver it a little bit easier. I don't think there was like resentment as far as that. Like I never felt any type of like resentment that people didn't notice. I never felt resentment that there was this like other standard. I think I just kind of carried all of it of like, oh, here I am doing this to these really nice people and who've never done anything but want me to win and succeed. And so like in my mind, hiding it meant it wasn't happening and I didn't have to deal with it.
I ask about, family a lot because that's such like a, it's very important, but also because every family is so different. And I know for me with like my brother, from what I understand, he kind of went through, in and out of addiction for, I guess if that's possible, right? For 10 plus years. I think when he was like in his early 20s through his almost mid 30s. And for me, he was a wonderful brother, wonderful person, everything. But for me, some of the battles that, I would say drove me, I don't want to say away, but just irritated me, I guess is the right word, was the lying. I felt like I could never get a straight answer out of him. And so that did cause, for me internally, a lot of frustration towards him. And that's something now I'm trying to process and understand after his death, because, we never had that chance to really kind of clear the air of like, what is going on, what's happening. He did talk about his mental struggles and all that. And later on when I went through battle and anxiety and stuff, I came to sympathize a lot more and understand it. But it was just the small lying part of it. And that's why I asked, like, did your sister, and it sounds like you guys did fairly well.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I misunderstood the question. If they had resentment towards me, probably, yeah. Because same type of thing, like lots of lying. I mean, my parents got the worst of it because I stole things from them that were irreplaceable. I was constantly lying and manipulating. And yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of resentment towards just, I mean, I wasn't a good person at the time. And, one of the most like amazing things that my mom ever said is, when I made an amends to her after I was clean, she said that she knew that she loved her kids unconditionally, but she never truly understood the meaning of unconditional love until having a drug addict as a kid because it's like all these horrible, horrible, horrible things I did. She was like, I don't feel any ill will towards you. I'm just so happy that you're alive and you're okay now. And so I could see where like, it would be hard for you not to see that end result of like, okay, well, they're okay now and we can sort through it. I would imagine that'd be very confusing.
Yeah, no, it's no, you understood the question right. I probably at the end going through my own thoughts there. That's a very powerful statement that your mom made, because I know with just like any mom, and my mom, losing her oldest child, like you can see there is just absolute unconditional love. I mean, it's she would want to give up her life for him just to bring him back. Addiction is just a awful, awful beast. That is just, oh man, the millions of families who have gone through this in America and around the world. It's awful. And that's wonderful that, you were able to make amends with your family. And I don't want to jump too far ahead into your recovery since we're still going through, your college time here. But so again, I apologize, another tangent. So yeah, please continue.
So yeah, there's just kind of more efforts to try and control it. I ended up doing like a semester abroad in Italy because I was like, okay, like I'll just move and then I won't know where to get dope and then that'll be fine. And then that just turned into heavy alcoholism. And eventually I think I got prescribed like a opiate cough syrup. So then I was just abusing that as well as drinking a lot. And also somewhere back, I was really getting into like speedballs and goofballs, which would be like mixing coke and heroin and meth, and just kind of continuing to do whatever drugs on top of that. But when I was in Italy, it felt like I was sort of normal because binge drinking was sort of acceptable. And when I got back, I was like, okay, I did such a good job. I'm not going to start again. I think within 2 days, I started doing heroin again. And also I was overdosing a lot. I forgot to say this. From like 19 or whenever I shot up for the first time, I'm like very prone to overdosing. I would say probably between 30 and 50 times I've done it.
Gee, really?
Yeah. And sometimes I would just wake up on my own, and like sometimes I would be alone and I would wake up and I would just know from the way I like fell, or, really like when I think about it now, I'm like, oh my God. But like, there was times where there was like a glass on the table and I woke up and my face had been like smashed in the glass and it was like just barely away from my eye. Or other times I'd wake up and people were, resuscitating me. There was lots of times where I would wake up and I have no recollection of what happened and everyone else would be crying. And I'd be like, what's wrong, you guys? And and they'd be like, what are you talking about? So yeah, that was happening a lot. And just, I was freaking people out. It was getting to where people didn't want me using at their house anymore.
And just to make sure I heard that right, that was a 30 to 50, 30 to 5.
Yeah, I would say dozens for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. For me, I saw one person overdosing and called 911. They gave him Narcan. Still had no idea what addiction was or what it looked like. And I still remember that day, exactly, from the outside looking in, right? It's just every single step of that whole, 15-minute episode. It's insane. So when you say 30 to 50, I mean, God, first of all, I'm so glad you're here talking to me because that's a testament to yourself of finding recovery and holding on to it. So that's awesome.
Well, I would say the most insane part about it is that I think a normal person looks at that and goes, oh my gosh, I'm killing myself. I'm going to die one of these times. But for me, I took that as this is proof that I can't die. I've woken up so many times from overdosing that it won't happen. That's like how intense my denial was on like, here's the thing that is literally you dying and coming back. And I'm like, yeah, but coming back, this proves that I'm not going to die any of these times, and
did that make you just go harder and harder and harder?
Yeah. And I mean, it just kind of gave me the justification for like, no, it's fine every time. Relax, calming people down after I no, it's fine. I'm fine. This happens a lot. And just how insane that is. It doesn't, No,
like right now, my heart rate like elevated. It's still elevated, hearing that 30 to 50 times, because for me, just seeing it once, like it's freaky. It's something I don't want anybody to witness or let, someone to go through. It's awful. And oh man. And I understand what you're saying, like, in terms of it justified you to go harder and, it's proof that you can't die and things. I get that mindset.
Just delusion.
Yeah, right.
Pure delusion.
That never happened though, like at home. That was just, it sounded like mostly with your friends and.
No, it happened at home. There was one time I was at lunch with my grandma and I went into the bathroom and she walked in and saw me kind of with my head on the ground. And I woke up right as she was getting the staff. And like, I had to quickly be like, oh, I just, like, just, it was happening everywhere. And
That's insane. Oh my gosh.
it was very scary for her. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
it was not, I think in a lot of ways it was harder for the people around me because I just wasn't there. All of a sudden I fell asleep and then I woke up. But like, I think, like you said, watching it, I think that was very traumatic for people. It's why a lot of people didn't want me using around them anymore.
Yeah, no, it is. It's very traumatic. And, yeah, I understand both sides. I understand why the friend said, please, I don't want to see that again. And on your side, in terms of like the justification and I can't die. I've learned that justification, talking to so many people now. And at first when I heard that, I was like, that just, like you said, it just seems ridiculous. It's like asinine. But the more I've come to understand addiction and the power of it, the more I'm able to understand that mindset. So, and I want people to understand, and this is where I get like really upset. And again, if this was like 5 years ago, I'd probably had the same, I guess, stigma that's out there, right? Oh, well, they overdose, so who cares if they live, right? And I don't care how many times someone overdoses, whether it's one or never or 500 times, there's always that one chance, they're going to see that light, get into recovery and live a wonderful, prosperous life, make amends, do everything. It doesn't matter. It just, addiction affects probably, I got to imagine, almost every single person in America. And I don't know why there is that stigma still. Sorry, I should take that back. I understand it because it's been so ingrained into our popular culture for so long. And it took me to find my brother dead to break out of that stigma. And that's the worst part for me thinking about this is I had to find someone dead for me to go, holy shit, this is the end result of addiction. And here is a wonderful, loving person, big smile, friends to everyone. And it happened to him. And again, I don't care if someone has overdosed or whatever, people can find recovery. So, and again, I'm sorry to keep hijacking your story. It just, yeah, man, I just can't believe 30 to 50 times. I'm really happy I'm here talking to you. And
yeah, and I think you have a really great point that I really agree with. No addict can find recovery if they're dead. And so, I think that's why harm reduction and things like that, it can be controversial, even in the recovery community. But at the end of the day, like, we can't recover and get better if we're dead.
So you said that's an interesting point. You said within the recovery community. Are you referring to like things like methadone or Suboxone and stuff like that?
Methadone, Suboxone, also like harm reduction, like, safe shooting sites, needle exchanges, all that stuff.
That's controversial?
Maybe controversial isn't the word, but there's some people who believe like, no, it should just be like 100%. You go completely abstinent from all drugs. And so the idea of like, some people think that it's protecting people from consequences to have like a safe injection site or a needle exchange. And the idea is like consequences are the thing that brings us to our rock bottom and gets us clean. But, if it wasn't for needle exchanges, I probably would be dealing with a lot of diseases or things that I would, lots of people are, I think that needle exchanges really helped me a lot. There was a point where I was on Suboxone and it didn't work for me, but I know people who have long-term recovery who started out with Suboxone for a year or two. I know people, same with methadone. I think that for some people it works, for some people it doesn't. And like, if it even works for a few people, why not have it as an option for them to eventually find complete abstinence and long-term recovery, if that's what it takes to get them to that point.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I read some, I think it was on a Facebook group a couple of days ago, and someone who's been, it was either methadone or Suboxone for a year or two, and they came on and asked the group, is it okay for me to still be on this? Because I don't want to be viewed as someone who's not abstinent from all drugs. And I'm going, oh my God. Like that just, again, when you look from the outside in, it seems so ridiculous. Like here is something that is giving a person a new life. He's allowed to take a medication every single day to be able to go function, to hold down a job, to hold down a life, relationship, get away from the previous life, right? And people still say, no, that's still using. And you're just going, what? Like that just, It's so frustrating to see that and I would never have guessed like safe consumption sites and needle exchanges would be controversial within the recovery community. I mean, listen to a few podcasts, I can understand like I guess the old school of thought before all this stuff, kind of was prevalent and came out, but it breaks my heart when people like have to question themselves of using a medication that is saving their life.
Yeah. And I think the people who do feel that way, I don't believe it's coming from a bad place. I just think, when people's experience was that it didn't work for them or a certain way worked for them, they want so badly for people to get better that they think, okay, well, this is how I did it. This is how you should do it too. And I think it's coming from a place of like, they just want people to have the thing that they have. And maybe they didn't get it through those harm reduction things. But, at the same time, like how it doesn't feel good for people to say you're not clean when you're still working hard on it. Like maybe it does still have like narcotics in it, but like the goal is to eventually get to a point that you're not. And if those are the stepping stones. But at the end of the day, also, we're not doctors. So like if that is the route someone's going, I think that's great. And I think when somebody is struggling with that later, they'll be able to tell them, hey, I did it this way and it worked for me. And there's just more experiences of different ways people get it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so back to your story, a lot of wonderful points touched there. And, so you kind of mentioned, at the age of 19 through, sounds like end of college, you overdosed between 30 to 50 times. And you're kind of, where we left off is like, you're kind of nearing your time in college and
yeah. So after I graduated college, and also like when I came back, I was just very like my last semester after coming back, I was super isolating. Like I was sewing and I wasn't really leaving my apartment. I was just very, so I was just isolating. It was to the point where, most of my roommates who I was friends with didn't come back. And I was just kind of living with roommates I didn't really know. So I was just really isolating. My hygiene was bad. It was like really getting to a point where I was just hitting kind of this like emotional emptiness bottom. And I graduated college and then, I was always able to kind of maintain school because you can do it around your schedule of getting high and all that. But as soon as it came time to get a job, like I could not hold a job, couldn't be on time. I couldn't show up if I needed to get high and go get drugs. I just couldn't maintain having to be somewhere at a certain time. And so I ended up moving to North Dakota and we called it geographical, where you move to try and fix your problems. That's when I was on Suboxone, but it didn't really work for me because I wasn't doing it right. I was still drinking and smoking weed and doing meth sometimes and doing heroin whenever I would go back to visit. So it was just kind of, I wasn't doing it properly. And after I left North Dakota, I kind of really hit my first time trying to get clean. I was back at my parents' house and I think I stole some money from them or something. Like I broke into their room and stole some money. And it was like to the point where I knew they were going to find out soon. And so I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe I just I forgot to say how they found out. So my friends, I think most of the same ones who held that intervention for me back in high school, they knew I wasn't showing up to things when I was home visiting. I didn't go to someone's birthday party. So they kind of did this thing where we all hung out and then they brought me into another room to show me something. And then they looked in my bag and they saw needles. And so they ended up telling my family. And I was pissed. I was, it felt like such a betrayal. I was so angry. I had done such a good job of like keeping up appearances and I put so much work into them not finding out. And then the other half of me was so relieved because I didn't have to tell them. Because there was times where I really wanted to stop. I really wanted to get help. But and I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to tell them. I'm just going to say something. And then when it came to like the point, like that adrenaline before you're going to do something major that will change everything. And then I would just wuss out because they'd be like, yeah, but then I won't be able to get high anymore. Or then they'll be really, I won't be able to handle the reaction or whatever it was. So part of me was like really relieved that I didn't have to be the ones to break their hearts and tell them that. That was right before I moved to North Dakota. And so they reacted in a way any parent would react. They were really upset. They did a really good job of, they said, we decided we're just going to not blame each other or try and figure out how it was our fault. We're just going to, try and moving forward, like what can we do to help? How what do we do? And so that's kind of when I got on Suboxone and ended up moving. So after I moved back, I took some money. It was from a place where they were about to find out. It was just a matter of time. So I just kind of thought, okay, well, I'll just say I want to go to rehab and then I relapsed and like that'll kind of absolve me from what I did. I didn't really plan on staying clean. I just kind of thought if I can have a little bit of clean time, then I won't be withdrawing and then I can just use sporadically. Like I just need a break and I can figure out this like equation algorithm where I won't be addicted anymore. Because I really thought that I was just addicted because I was physically addicted, which isn't true because crack isn't physically addicting and people are still addicted to crack. It's the drugs that are addicting. But in my mind, if I could just get over the withdrawal, I would be fine. I would just move on with my life and I would be happy and adjusted. And I would like do heroin on the weekend sometimes. It'd be no big deal. And so I went to treatment. I got out, moved into clean and sober house. They're called Oxford houses in Washington. I had a really great time. Like it was the first time I really bonded with people clean. It was the first time I had been clean with no opiate in my system because, Suboxone still has an opiate in it since I was like years and years and years. So like feeling all these new emotions, some of them were scary, some of them were super fun. I was laughing. I hadn't like laughed really hard in a long time. It was like, it really gave me this taste of like how attractive recovery can be and like that there is life after recovery or after drugs, that it's not like my life is over. And I didn't really plan on staying clean though. So I ended up relapsing after maybe like 30 days, something like that. And I was hiding it from my house, just kind of snapped right back into the old behaviors of just lying and trying to keep up these appearances. And eventually they found out and I got kicked out of the house and I was homeless, I guess. Like I was just kind of figuring out whose house I could stay at. I knew my parents didn't want me there if I was using, and I didn't want to put them in the position to have to enforce that boundary. Same reasons why I didn't want to tell them in the first place. It was like, I didn't want to make them have to go through enforcing that boundary because I knew it would be very difficult. And I also didn't want to see their reactions of having to do it because maybe then I would want to stop and I wasn't ready to do that. So there was a couple weeks of that. And then I just kind of went through the same cycle again. I finally told my parents that I had relapsed. I went to treatment again, wasn't really planning on staying clean, thought this is where it went wrong the last time. Now I'm going to get it this time. I just have to do this, this, and this, and then it'll work this time. And the exact same things happened. Moved into clean and sober, relapsed, couldn't stop. What I thought I had control, I didn't. It got out of hand. And this time I really burned a lot of my relationships in that house. And so when I got kicked out again, I remember I was sitting outside at my drug dealer's house and it was like raining. And I remember being like, man, like I'm homeless again. I don't have anyone to call. I don't even have anyone to complain to that this is happening to me. Nobody wants to talk to me. And like, I just had this like empty feeling in my gut. And I was like, I feel this way. It finally just clicked that like, this is because I use drugs. No matter how I use drugs, this is where I end up, in this exact place every time. And it's never going to be any different unless I stop the drug part of it. And it all made sense. Probably what made sense to everybody else around me, but we call it like a moment of clarity, really put it in perspective. Like, oh, okay, like it's not that I'm using wrong or I didn't do it in the right way to control it. It's that I can't control it, period. And this is always where I end up. Because the last time I tried, that was going to be the time. Like that was the way I really had a good plan. And it still got me exactly where I am.
Wow. Yeah, that's, I guess, yeah, like you said, like kind of your rock bottom right there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you had that moment of clarity, what happened next?
I got really high. And because if the moment of clarity was enough, then I would have just not needed all the things I need now to stay clean. So I called my mom. And I was like, it happened again. I want to do it this time. Like, and she was like, okay, call it. Like, thank God all this happened before I was 26. And so my dad's insurance paid for it. If it would have happened, I feel very, very fortunate that I was still on my dad's insurance because of Obama's changes and all that. So I went to treatment again. The first 2 times I went, I just kind of had fun and like flirted with the boys there and like just kind of wasn't really taking it seriously. This time I was taking it seriously. I went to an all women's one and I was miserable, and it was exactly what I needed. It was hard. I had to like look at all this stuff and really make peace with the fact that I wasn't going to use anymore. And I got on Vivitrol, which is like an opiate blocker. It doesn't have narcotics in it, but it makes it so if you try to get high, you can't. And it also cuts down on cravings. And when I got out of treatment, I moved into the clean and sober house where I met Amanda. I was so terrified of going back to what had been happening that I really just did everything that was suggested. I followed rules for the first time, where I was actually like enforcing rules on other people in the house. And like, I was just so scared. Like, I knew what I was doing wasn't working at all. And so I was willing to try anything.
So from the ages of 14 to 20, almost 26, you battled these demons of addiction for almost 12 years there. Wow.
24. I got clean like end of 24.
Oh, 20. Okay. 24. Yeah. And every time I talk to someone, it's kind of like this, I don't want to say a reason why there was, addiction, or, there was something in them, but it just sounds like I guess you did mention at the beginning of the podcast, like you always had that kind of this obsessive compulsive type of deal from a young age, and the sweets and stuff. Sorry, that just popped back in my mind. But people like always think there's like some sort of traumatic event or whatever it may be that leads to addiction, or they're just what's the right word here? Just lazy, I guess, or whatever, and don't want a job and they're on the streets, right? But you were just a very regular girl from a regular family, and you just you tried a couple of things, and some of those things just made you feel euphoric and got all the anxiety and stress away. So through your recovery, were you able to kind of pinpoint, why you took drugs?
I mean, I think it's a combination of like, I want to escape the way I feel. I think most drug addicts are sensitive people, and sometimes the emotions can be kind of overwhelming. And so we can kind of shut those off, either just in like a mental way or like in a, through taking drugs. But I also think just like mentally, I have the disease of addiction, and my brain puts those things as I need this to survive, and like once that's activated, it's you can't unactivate it. But I do think it's the escaping. I remember having to go to the hospital when I was like in third grade because I was watching something on TV that was making me so anxious for the person on TV that my heart was like vibrating.
Really?
And yeah, like it was going so fast they couldn't. So I think just like emotions and feelings and things can be overwhelming, and that can kind of escape you from it.
No, I totally understand. My brother was a very sensitive person. He could dish it out very well, but if you just said anything to him, I mean, he took it very personally. He was a very, very sensitive person. So I definitely understand. So I think you mentioned, before we started talking, or before the podcast, 6 years you've been sober now?
I'll have 6 years on December 31st. So almost.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
That's awesome. So tell us about, those 6 years. What have you been doing, and, really how wonderful it feels. I have to imagine.
Yeah. I mean, it's fantastic. Like, I think the beginning of it was like navigating all these new emotions and feelings. But it's like, once you get in that mindset of like, okay, but once I navigate them, I'll know how to deal with them from here on out. And like taking each thing as like a new challenge, and really bonding with people in recovery, like the people in my Oxford house, like really just saved my life in so many ways, because like they made it, this is a fun thing we're doing together. We're all sharing this experience. We're like staying up late, drinking energy drinks, like whatever I needed at the time. And then, 12-step programs, that's like the personal growth, where really going through and, looking at all those behaviors that I developed as a survival mechanism in my addiction or just in life, and really looking at what behaviors aren't serving me anymore, and what things I'm still doing, but they're not actually a positive thing. They maybe made sense at a time, but they don't now. And just being able to really grow and no longer feel like, oh, I'm going to have to be clean my entire life, but actually being like excited about it. Like, I love this. I love my working a program. I love all the people in my life who are in recovery. Like it's so ingrained in my life and part of my life that, I can't imagine being any other way. And like getting my first job and then giving me keys to the office. And I'm like, my own parents don't give me keys to their house. Like just all those little things. And, once once I had about 18 months clean, I moved to San Diego, wanted to try, now I'm doing kind of the geographicals, but like in a good way where I'm actually thinking it out before, like I want to try this or that. I went and traveled Southeast Asia for a year and a half and like backpacked, like I saved up, same thing, really thought out, saved up for a year beforehand. And then, kind of figured out budgeting that and working along the way. And then when I came back, I moved to New York and I've been following my dreams of doing stand-up and just...
Oh, so you're a comedian.
I am, yeah.
Awesome.
You would know it from this, hopefully.
That's awesome. So Amanda, last week when we were talking, she mentioned that it took her, and sorry, so this is, I want to ask you this. So like for her, it was about 90 days in when she finally kind of, I think it was like 60 to 90 days, she said, where she was like, wow, I can kind of hold on to this recovery now. And I, each day is better and better. And, and I interviewed her boyfriend, Sam, on Thursday, and he said the same thing too, around that 90-day mark. And what I find so interesting is most recovery, I think, or probably all recovery, I'm sure, that is paid for by insurance is 30 days. And when you start thinking that, like how fast 30 days goes, and that's just like basically enough time just to get sober. What was, I know you went 2 times before, the third time was your third time the charm. How many days did it take for you to go, wow, this is what I want. This is where I want to be?
Yeah, I would probably say maybe around the 90-day mark, maybe even longer, honestly. Like I think maybe it was around 4 months that I started to be like, okay, like there's things, like the first few months just felt like surviving. Like, okay, I just need to figure out how to fill my day, get through the day, don't get high, and then wake up tomorrow and do it again. And then it really kind of, I would say maybe at around 4 months or so, started to feel like, all right, like I'm going to wake up and do this. And I started to kind of really get that joy back. Like, I think there was fun in those first 4 months too, but it was kind of this frantic, like, what are we going to do for fun? Let's go do this. Like, it's very this like manic energy, like, let's do this so we don't do other things. But I do think, yeah, it sucks that it's 30 days in a treatment place because honestly, they give you a lot of really good information, but you're so, your brain's just coming back that it's like, yeah, that new information's interesting. It's not necessarily that anything that's going to stick with you. It's really just you have 30 days clean when you leave there. And I remember talking to my insurance company before the last time I went, and I was like, is there a long-term treatment I can get into? And they're like, no, your insurance doesn't cover that. And I was like, well, maybe you wouldn't have to be covering it for the third time if you
Right?
just gave me one that was longer. And they were like...
That makes total sense. I wish, there's so many times I've talked to people and it seems like it's about a 98% rate where it's like, we wish insurance would cover it for at least 3 to 6 months, bare minimum 3 months. And, talking to 3 people, including yourself today in the last week, it's right there between that 90 to, 120 days. And like, that's what I don't get about insurance. It's like, why, cover it for 30 days? That's so outdated from, it's 80 years, and keep paying for people to go back and back and back, I'd love to see those rates. It'd be so interesting to see, but yeah, so for you, it's about 120 days.
Yeah, I would say roughly about that. And that's with being on Vivitrol, which helped with my cravings. The first 2 times that I went, I didn't even, when people were talking about cravings, I didn't know what they were talking about because I was just experiencing like one continuous craving. And it wasn't until getting out that time, there was a little bit of spaces in between the cravings where I was like, oh, this is what a craving is. You don't constantly just want to get high. There's some breaks and got it.
So you're 6 years in now, you're in Manhattan. You're pursuing your dream of stand-up comedy. What stuff are you focusing on for your stand-up?
So I do a lot of stuff that's not addiction-based, but I have a hefty amount that is kind of about my addiction. And I try really hard not to glorify it. Like I try to make the punchline, like, look how disgusting my life was and that I was just fine with that, or that, like, that was normal to me. Like I try to make it where the funny part is how horrific the things I'm saying. And I, when I walk out, I don't look like what you would imagine this like junkie who sold drugs and all this stuff. But yeah, I do, and then I have some stuff about recovery too. I try it. I feel like with comedy, like anytime I've gone through something bad, it's like, well, at least maybe I'll get a killer set out of this. Like, so I apply that with my addiction too. Like it's a unique experience I have. And like, if I can kind of translate that to being digestible to a crowd, I think that, I mean, one, I think it can be funny. And two, I think that kind of helps with the stigma when we see people like who are just normal people. And it's like, oh, okay, they did that too.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's going to be so big. I mean, people like yourself who are coming out and, showing on stage, this is what you went through. Here I am living a very normal, productive life now. And, now giving back. That's so cool. I forgot to mention this or ask this last couple of times is living through this pandemic, especially in Manhattan, where you guys kind of had that early, very heavy wave. How has that affected your recovery, if at all? Or are you being 5 or 6 years in now, are you just kind of settled into your habits where it's like, okay, I'm not worried about that anymore?
I mean, I think it's always important to like stay diligent. Like if I get to a point where I'm like, oh, I'm not worried about it, I won't relapse. And I think I'm kind of in a dangerous mindset. So I do try to always, keep doing what I'm doing. But I actually kind of cheated during the pandemic because I didn't ride out the wave here in Manhattan. I luckily went to go visit Amanda on like March 10th. And everything popped off. And I was like, she was like, do you want to just stay here? And I was like, yeah. And so I stayed there for like 4 months and we had a blast. And we just like really got to like also kind of like, I'd be like, I'm freaking out today. I'd be like, cool, let's talk about it. And then the next day she'd be like, now I'm freaking out today. And we could really just kind of be like buddies and like the really strange stuff that was going on. We could go to meetings. They're all on Zoom now and stuff. And so I think it would have looked a lot different if I would have stayed here, but I was lucky enough that I happened to go with Amanda and like she got me working out, which I never do. And so like we kind of got into like a nice little routine of like meditating and then doing step work and then doing this. And so it was really easy to kind of stay connected and grounded just because we don't get to spend that much time together. So to have 4 months together, we were like, I mean, it's very sad. I don't mean to make light of how horrible the pandemic has been and people have died and stuff. But yeah, we found our niche.
It sounds like, 4 months of you and your best friend and, doing what you guys do.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Nesil, I thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm like trying to process, like trying to, think about, wow, like, myself at the age of 14, 15, going through all this and continuing through it for the age of 24, it's a lot. And, the amount of times, like you said, between 30 to 50 times of overdosing. And now here you are in New York, in Manhattan, pursuing your dreams. Like it is so awesome and so inspiring. It really, truly, thank you for sharing your story and your recovery and how well you're doing and good luck in the future. And I would love to see some of your stand-up if you have it anywhere.
Okay.
So thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was so nice to meet you. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me. It was really a nice way to spend the last hour.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you for listening to the Henry Zunkel podcast. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review. If you would like to learn more about our nonprofit, please go to henryzunkel.org. As we say here at Henry Zunkel, you are loved, never judged.